everybody for joining today. As Anna mentioned, we will be talking about open access to publications and preprints. As you now know, I am part of the Europe PMC team at EMBL-EBI. Today in the webinar, I'm going to be talking about the point of view of Europe PMC, but open access and open science can be many different things to many different people. And we do refer to Europe PMC as an open science platform, but essentially it is an open and free life sciences research literature database. When we talk about Europe PMC being an open science platform, what we want to say there is that beyond open access to publication, we strive to be open in all other areas of our work, including linking to open research data and open research software, and also supporting open scholarly communications with things like open peer reviews and commentaries or open citations. Our mission is to build open, full-text scientific literature resources and to support innovation by engaging users, enabling contributors, and integrating research data. In our work at Europe PMC, we focus primarily on three development areas. We work to support publishing innovation, and from ORCIDs to preprints, Europe PMC allows you to stay on top of the cutting-edge science with the new types of content and advanced features. We work to support reproducible science and open data reuse by linking publications with underlying research data, and I'm going to talk about that a bit more today. And we also strive to enable the data-driven discovery, where we hope to offer more efficient ways to read and process scientific literature with the help of text mining and machine learning technologies. So I want to start by talking about how Europe PMC supports open access policies of different funders, but also how it came to be and why it exists. So Europe PMC is an open community resource that is developed by EMBL-EBI, but we are also partners with the PubMed Central USA as a part of the PMC International network. Now, Europe PMC is supported by 34 international research funders, including Wellcome Trust, European Research Council, World Health Organization, and many others. And those funders, including EMBL, through their open access policy, expect and require that the researchers who are supported by these funders make their articles available in Europe PMC within a certain time from official publication. Usually that's 6 months. So Europe PMC initially was established as an open access repository to support the open access policies of these different funders. But in order for the open content that's in Europe PMC to have maximum reach and maximum potential, Europe PMC became a collaborator in a network of archives called PMC International. Essentially, this collaboration now includes two nodes, PMC USA and Europe PMC. There used to be PMC Canada as well, which was retired some time ago. And what happens is that the nodes within the network exchange the full text content. So everything that's deposited into Europe PMC by researchers supported by Europe PMC funders is shared through with the PMC USA and vice versa. So the full text content is continuously exchanged and therefore is available to wider audiences that use these resources interchangeably. Although Europe PMC was set up as an open access repository, we wanted to go further and we wanted to offer innovative features that were based on this open content and open data that we host. And so in this section, I just was hoping to show a few examples of how open access underpins innovation in Europe PMC and why beyond access to full text, it is important to share your science openly and how it can influence development of new tools, for example. So regarding Europe PMC's content, we host nearly 40 million different records from trusted sources around the globe. The content is available to anyone, anywhere for free. And it includes different types of publications, from peer-reviewed articles to preprints, as well as other documents. And all of that is enriched with another layer of resources, such as links to data, reviews, methods and materials, citations, and many more. And I'll talk about that in a minute as well. So in terms of content, Europe PMC works as an aggregator, and we provide access to resources from different other platforms. I've mentioned PubMed Central, but we also index journal articles from PubMed itself, as well as agricultural literature from Agricola and Chinese biological abstracts. We provide access to preprints from 21 different platforms, including servers like bioRxiv, medRxiv, SSRN, and others. And also different types of documents, including books, patents, theses, and healthcare guidelines. Now, all that content comes at varying levels of availability, and this is essentially determined by agreements with the publishers. So from our side, we would love for everything to be open and freely available to everyone. However, at the present, from the nearly 40 million abstracts, we have full text for about 7 million of those records. That is full text that's available in Europe PMC itself. And then we provide access to free full text on other platforms through our collaboration with Unpaywall. I'll introduce you to Unpaywall on the next slide. Of the 7 million full text that's available in Europe PMC, nearly half is licensed for reuse. So 7 million are available to read, but for things like text mining and programmatic analysis, about half are licensed specifically for that. So I mentioned Unpaywall, and Unpaywall itself is an open database of free scholarly articles. They harvest open access content from publishers and repositories like Europe PMC, but also institutional repositories and country-specific repositories. And they make it easy to find, track, and use. All content comes from legal sources. And so in Europe PMC, you can access additional full text from third-party websites through Unpaywall link, where we don't have full text to display to you. For those of you who don't use Europe PMC, and I hope that you'll consider, there is a free browser extension from Unpaywall itself that you could install to find free full text anytime on the web. We have different levels of full text availability, but they also differ for different types of content. So for example, for patents, theses, and guidelines, we only have abstracts. All books are available as full text. For preprint, full text comes for COVID-19 related content. And then for articles, it varies based on publisher agreements. So in terms of being able to read, that's all very important, but I promised you to talk about innovation. So where does open access help us develop new features? And in Europe PMC, access to open data and open content means that we can offer you intuitive search for articles and preprints. We can provide easier access to figures and data, and we can create something that we call enriched article that's linked to open peer reviews and other community provided materials. So how does it work? In terms of search, Europe PMC is a little bit different from several search tools out there in that we search through both abstract and full text. And so in that sense, we are different from Web of Science and Scopus, but are a bit more similar to Google Scholar. So having that free full text in Europe PMC means that we can provide search features like article section search, where readers could limit their search to a particular section. If you'd like to find something that's related to methods, you could search specifically methods and material section, or if you're looking for a graph to reproduce in your own work, you could search through figure legends, or perhaps you're interested in introduction, discussion, results, and many other parts of the article more specifically. It also allows us to highlight important concepts in the text. That's what we call annotations. Europe PMC finds and highlights these annotated concepts with the help of text mining technologies. There are different types of annotations available. So here, experimental methods are highlighted at the bottom of the slide, but you could equally search for articles that mention gene-disease relationships, or mutations, protein modifications, and many other types of annotated concepts. Part of that is search for data. So one of the annotation types is data citations. So for those of you who are interested to see which articles cite a particular protein structure or electron microscopy images, this is all possible to do through Europe PMC, and it is based on the open content and open data that we host. In terms of easy access to figures and data, having full text in Europe PMC allows us to, for example, create a figure preview. This is particularly useful for people who are used to scan the article. Perhaps they only look at the abstract, but don't have the time to go through the entire full text before they are sure that this is what they would like to look at. And so figure preview is a great example of that. And it's possible because full text is openly available in Europe PMC. Similarly, we pull out data mentions from full text and we combine them in a data section, which is really useful for those who want to have a glance at all of the data associated with the publication in one place. So that provides an easy way to look at the data and hopefully supports reuse and reproducibility a bit more. When I talk about enriched article here, it's not as much the open access to the full text as those parts of the wider open science umbrella that I have mentioned. So the way that Europe PMC enriches article with other information is through collaboration with other partners in the open science field who host open and free to access resources that are relevant to the researchers. So one such example would be reviews. Here you can see this publication has linked reviews from faculty opinions and Fablons, and we provide links to reviews from several different platforms, which is particularly great for example for preprints where traditional journal peer review is not available. We also link to, for example, protocols and materials. So here on the slide at the bottom, you can see that the publication has a link to cell lines resource called Cellosaurus, but this might be protocols at protocols.io or reagents through SynBio catalog and many others. So this enriched article provides a way for the researcher to access additional information that might not be directly available through the article itself. But even here, access to full text makes a difference. So in Europe PMC, we calculate citations based on the openly available information. So that allows you citation jumping, going from the article to the citing counterpart and vice versa. And through one of such collaborations, as I mentioned earlier, we're also able to display a count for smart citations via CiteAI. So CiteAI classifies the citations into supporting, mentioning, and contrasting, and they do that through accessing the full text and then using a machine learning algorithm that then enables this more granular look at the different types of citation practices that might exist in the field. So I've talked about why open access can be more than just reading and how that works, but that needs to be supported by the right conditions of licensing. So here I'd like to talk about the importance of licensing for reuse. So I will start by saying that usually literary works under which scientific articles fall as well are protected under copyright, which is an intellectual property right that's assigned automatically to the creator. It might differ for different countries. So in here on the slide, the information is described for the UK, but generally copyright is quite commonly used right for creative works outputs. So it might apply to research article, but it can also apply to, for example, research data. What cannot be copyrighted is, of course, facts. So copyright is quite a broad umbrella. It essentially means that the author decides on who can reuse the work and under which conditions. And that can be determined if an author decides to assign a license. So license essentially is kind of a modifier to the copyright itself. And there are many different types of licenses, but I'll highlight Creative Commons because they are quite popular in the scientific world, and also because several funders use them for their open access policies requirements. So as I said before, in the case where no license is assigned to a work, you don't give default permission to reuse it. And I should say that this graph this image is kindly provided by an organization called ESA-Bio, who works with preprints. And so the examples here are for preprints, but it similarly works for any other types of research outputs. So in the case of no license, for example, without your explicit permission, you cannot put your own article on your institutional website, or for countries where no fair use exemption is available for copyright, other scientists might not be permitted to reuse a figure in their presentation about your work, and so on and so forth. So in order to grant this permission more widely, as I mentioned, license can be used. And so the different types of Creative Commons licenses are outlined here. The first one on the left-hand side is a CC0 waiver. Essentially, it puts your work into the public domain and waives all copyright-related rights. So this is something that, for example, Wikipedia uses for all of its content, but also, for example, for works created by US government employees. The next level is a CC BY license, where BY stands for attribution. So that allows anyone to reuse or modify your work as long as they provide attribution to you and include a link back to the original. And then the different variations include share alike, which essentially requests that any subsequent versions or modifications of your work have to be shared under the same license, not more restrictive or less restrictive, non-commercial or NC, which I think is self-explanatory, and then non-derivative. And that's the one that I wanted to talk about in particular. So with the non-derivative license, you cannot modify the work, you can only sort of reuse it. So things like translations, highlighting, or figure adaptations, all these are not permitted under non-derivative license. And where it comes into play for tools like Europe PMC is, I've mentioned the annotations that we identify in the article text. Those annotated concepts can be highlighted when the reader is using the highlighter tool, so that you can navigate between the different instances of annotated concepts in the text. And in this case, we can only do this for articles that don't prohibit derivative works. So highlighting like this already is considered a derivative. And so there are many different ways in which a license can impact innovation and new tools being built. And that's just something to always consider. I said that Creative Commons licenses are not the only licenses. And in fact, in Europe PMC, the part of the 7 million freeform text are combined together under what we call an open access subset license. And so that essentially is similar to a Creative Commons license that generally allows more liberal redistribution and reuse, but those articles are still protected by copyright, and a special permission has been granted to Europe PMC and PMC USA by the publishers in most cases. And so this open access subset is available essentially to download in bulk. This is something that text miners and bioinformaticians often use to look at the literature, because it is openly available to them, not just as readers, but rather programmatically in a machine readable format. However, that also determines reuse and policies for cases where you, for example, would like to reuse or modify somebody else's figure. So in Europe PMC, these articles are labeled as free to read and use, as opposed to just free to read articles which have the full text available but don't permit reuse. I also wanted to go through a few frequently asked licensing questions, because I think that sometimes discussions around licensing don't focus on these points. So all of the Creative Commons licenses require for users to indicate that the changes have been made. So even if your work is in the public domain, if somebody modifies it, they do have to say that it has been modified. So it's not that you lose all control over your work. As long as you retain the copyright, you can always grant additional permissions on individual basis. So this in particular applies to cases where you transfer copyright to a journal or sign a license to publish agreement. So you might provide different licenses to different reusers. Licenses are permanent, but you can always release another version under another license. So that's particularly relevant for things like preprints, where your preprint could be licensed under one license, but then your published peer-reviewed journal article will be licensed differently. And finally, that professional norms for citation and plagiarism apply regardless of the license. So this is something that's an established norm in the scientific community, and even for public domain works, it is expected that they will be cited and attributed, even if the license doesn't explicitly says that they have to be doing that. So now that we've talked about reuse, I think it's really important to talk about reproducibility and the role that the open data plays in it. So when I say open data, I also mean fair data, and fair stands for findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. So it's not enough for data to be openly available, just like free full text in Europe PMC. It also has to be available in a particular standardized format through machine accessible programmatic ways. It should be clearly labeled with the license that's attached to it, and it should have enough metadata to find it. And the reason why that is all important is because in Europe PMC, we can then connect such fair data sets to the article that describes it. And this link is particularly important to then create tools that can help you answer scientific questions like this one. For somebody who would want to know for which human gene variants that are associated with diabetes there is a protein structure available, there can be an easy way to go through the literature that describes both of these concepts rather than connecting data from different databases alone. And so in Europe PMC, we connect literature and data in many ways, and there may be different kinds or types of data as you wish. There might be supplemental data files attached to the article itself. The article might be citing a particular resource or a particular data accession number, so a data record, perhaps. It might have been cited by a curated database. So a knowledge base, for example, like Flybase, might have gone through the article that the authors have written and then created a data record based on that regarding fly genetics or physiology. And finally, all of the data from the article may be explicitly described in the data availability statement. So in Europe PMC, in order to link literature and data, one way in which we do this is through text and data mining. So we identify data citations in the text for nearly 50 different data resources. And what that allows us to do is then provide this data-driven search for data citations in the text of the article. And so you can always search for a particular data type, like all protein structures cited in the literature, or you could look for a particular data record. So perhaps you're interested in the protein structure for one of the mitochondrial chaperone proteins. And so when you search by the accession number, you can then get literature results that are relevant for that search. we also highlight these accessions in the text, and I've shown this highlighting tool before. And for example, for protein structures or electron microscopy pictures, you can also access data at glance. So you don't need to go to the database itself. You can always see it while you're reading the paper if that's relevant to the data that you're assessing. I've also mentioned that we summarize data behind the paper in a separate data section, and that's again really important for people who want to look at all of the data that's been generated in the article and that was required essentially to produce these results. Now, in biology, there are different ways to cite data, and I've shown you before data citations through accession numbers. So accession numbers essentially are a short alphanumerical identifiers. Here, there is a data set PXD007956. In this case, we would need to know which database it was deposited to uniquely identify that data record. And so you can see that, again, in the example on the bottom of the slide, the data was deposited to the Protein Exchange Consortium or the PRIDE Partner Repository. In contrast to that, data DOI is a unique identifier for data that acts as a permanent link that essentially provides a URL that takes you to the data record. So data DOI will be an actionable link, whereas accession number will just be a citation in the text. Now, that's one way to look at data citation, but also when thinking about citing practices, you should always remember that it's important to cite not just the data, but also the publication. And so here's an example where that doesn't always happen. So there is a particular data record related to the structure of the HIV-1 GP120 core. Complexed with CD4 and a neutralizing human antibody. So that's a protein complex. And its accession in the protein data bank is 1GC1. Now, normally, when you've reused the data like that, you would also cite the publication that's generated that record. But when we do a search in Europe PMC for articles that have cited the accession but not the article, we can see that there's a good number of results that haven't done so. So citing data properly, whether through data DOIs or through data accessions with a mention of the resource, and citing the underlying article, these are all really important things to then ensure that the data is fair and can be reused by tools like Europe PMC to improve the data discoverability. And finally, in this part of the talk, I wanted to look at yet another part of the open science umbrella, at preprints as a tool to openly share research. Now, preprints are different from journal articles that traditionally undergo peer review process, in that preprints are posted by authors to a public server, either prior to such review or completely decoupled by it. Nonetheless, preprints are complete scientific manuscript. And so in some cases, they may be part of the publication workflow, where after posting a preprint, the authors will submit that manuscript to a journal where it undergoes peer review and essentially becomes a journal peer-reviewed article. But also in some cases, the process stops at post-preprint and authors never intend to publish it after rounds of peer review. There are several benefits of preprints for authors. Now, this slide is from the organization that I've mentioned before, called ASAP Bio. Preprints allow researchers to claim priority, increase their citation rate, receive feedback early, and also you can use them as a proof of productivity. Several funders and hiring committees accept preprints as part of your application. Europe PMC indexes preprints since 2018, and by now we are well over 300,000 preprints. And as you can see, there are many different servers that we pull content from, including quite popular bioarchive, but also preprints.org, ChemArchive, SSRN, Reset Square, and even F1000 open research publishing platforms, where manuscripts are posted as soon as they're submitted to the journal. And so that kind of version prior to the peer review is what we would call a preprint in Europe PMC. Preprints are integrated into the search. So for anybody who uses Europe PMC, as soon as you type your search query into the box, you will get results that will include preprints. So here you can see a preprint label for the first result highlighted in green. But you can also limit your search to preprints or even preprints that were later published as a peer-reviewed article by using the filters on the left. You can also limit your search to a particular server by using publisher syntax. And so you can see that bioRxiv provides us with nearly 120,000 preprints, which is nearly a half of the content that we host, preprint content that we host. Preprints in Europe PMC will look just like any other journal publication, except that they will be clearly labeled with an orange banner that will say that this article is a preprint and may not have been peer reviewed. So the readers can clearly identify what type of content they are looking at. But all the other features will work for preprints as well, including figures, free full text for COVID-19 related preprints, and even these enriching links for citations, reviews, and so on. So I mentioned figures. This is an example of a full text preprint from medRxiv. And so you can see that you will have the same navigation menu with article sections on the right, on the left. You will have all the same tools available for assessing the preprint. So you might look at the smart citations for preprints as well, or jump straight to reviews and recommendations. So I've mentioned we have several different providers, such as peer review, but also peer community in that review preprints specifically. And you can also add preprints to your ORCID record. So this is something that you can do for journal publications as well, but there are fewer tools available for preprints to do that. And so you can always use the claim to ORCID option on the right. And just to briefly explain what an ORCID is a persistent digital identifier issued by a nonprofit ORCID organization that helps to distinguish academic authors. So essentially, it's an ID for researchers that create outputs such as publications and preprints, but ORCID can also be used for data, software, grant applications, and many other things. So why is that important? Is that, again, in Europe PMC, it allows us to create new features. For example, suggested author feature will match authors who have an ORCID to your author search, and it will suggest refining your search by ORCID, which you can do. So if you look for an ORCID ID, you will get essentially a curated list of results based on their ORCID profile. So it helps you to distinguish researchers with common names, or it helps researchers who change names, for example, to get all of their science in one place. So Europe PMC, for instance, creates an author profile based on ORCIDs, and this author profile will include not just publications, but also preprints in Europe PMC. If you're interested to learn more about preprints, there is a course that talks a bit more about it, and you can also look at the upcoming webinars for the EBI training. So with that, it would be great if you could fill out the survey that launches after the webinar, and we're happy to take questions.
Great, thank you very much, Maria. And there's so much useful information in there that I think just wanted to make sure that everyone is aware that we are recording today, and that we will send out that recording tomorrow. So if you want to go back and review anything or share it with colleagues, you are very welcome to do that. And as Maria mentioned, there are some upcoming webinars. There we actually have 2 more this week. We're having quite a busy week here. So as you can see from that slide, we have our final open access webinar on Friday, and that's going to be a panel discussion webinar where actually Maria and some other colleagues are going to join us again on Friday to have a chat through some of these more general topics in open access and around open data. And tomorrow afternoon, we have an introduction to the new Uniprot website, which I'm sure many people are really keen to see. So we're going to have a tour through that new site and see how Uniprot has been updated. Okay, so I think we have one question ready to go, but if you do have any other questions, do just type them into the Q&A box and we can take a look at those. Okay, so first up, we have the question, are there any risks for authors associated with publishing a research outcome as a preprint before submitting it to the peer-reviewed journal?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So I know that there are many concerns surrounding preprints. One is often scooping and one is publication. So currently, I think preprints are gaining traction in life sciences, and especially after the pandemic. Many will find that publishers are much more aware of preprints, and so most of the publishing venues will have no issue with submitting a manuscript that's been pre-printed. However, that can cause a problem, and it's always useful to look at the publisher policies. I've mentioned ASAP Bio, and they have a really handy website with publisher and funder policies that describes whether preprints are accepted as scientific outputs. And then regarding scooping, so then again, in most cases, preprints actually provide a protection because you do post your work publicly. And so in that sense, I would be inclined to say that preprints actually protect you better, but that remains a concern where somebody might be able to publish a peer-reviewed publication that then they would consider a version of record over the preprint that you've posted. There are many different concerns around preprint, and again, I really encourage you to look through ASAP Bio resources because they go through these in much more details than I can today.
Great, thank you. It's a very interesting topic, I'm sure, with lots of different viewpoints. As Maria mentioned, there are some other pre-recorded webinars related to Europe PMC. So I've dropped the link that will hopefully have a big long list of them. So if there's anything to do with the resource that you are interested to see, lots of different recorded webinars that cover various topics around it there. So I think that is the only question we have now, but oh no, sorry, I spoke too soon. I think we'll have one more. So are there any resources on how to best publish or deposit raw data in the sense of a unified or specific way of how to do it, especially for big data sets?
So unfortunately, I'm not going to give you a very useful answer because I'm not an expert on data specifically. However, in terms of EBI resources, for example, every resource is going to have guidance on how to best submit the data type that you're looking for. And also several publishers will have guidelines on where to put the data that's associated with the publication that you have. There will be databases of repositories, which you can kind of go through and look at the policies and the requirements for the data processing. There are some questions that you as the data owner really need to ask yourself. Is it sensitive data? Does it need a special repository to kind of work around that? Does it contain personal data, for example, or medical data? Is it a big data set? Can you submit to a repository that, for example, issues a persistent identifier like a DOI so that the data becomes citable? How much metadata can you add? And how much depth can you describe your data set so that it's, again, much more discoverable than it would be if you used some repository? So there's definitely some information to look out for. And I'm sure there must be some training resources on that as well.
Yes, absolutely. And one thing I wanted to point out, that the open access webinar we had last week, so there's a link to that in the chat as well, was about finding data. But within that, we talked about how to find the right EBI resource for the kind of data you're looking for. And that applies for submitting data as well. So there was some information about how to find the resource you're after. But then once you have found the right one, there are, of course, help desks with people waiting to sort of answer your questions and help you submit that data. And one thing that the help desk staff often say is contact us as early as possible so that we can help you from the beginning. We can talk about what kind of metadata you require, rather than going, oh no, I need to submit this data straight away, what do I do? And panicking. We can work right from the start as soon as you know what kind of data you're actually going to be eventually submitting. So that was my main suggestion: contact help staff.
And also, I do want to mention that, I mean, sometimes it isn't easy to find a suitable resource. Perhaps your data is not structured or comes from a very new project for which there isn't really an established community with a database that you normally would submit your data to. And so EBI, for instance, develops BioStudies, which is a database for unstructured data. And so BioStudies can accept things like spreadsheets or birdsong recordings, you know, all these things that might not necessarily have a community space yet. So that's also something to kind of explore. Do you need a structured community resource that's kind of theme oriented, or is your data better fitted to an unstructured generic repository?